Hi, my name is Karen Admiraal, and the title of my capstone proposal is The Role of Reflection in Faculty Experience of Online Education During the Coronavirus Pandemic. So I just want to start out by giving you a little bit of background on online education before COVID-19, because of course, online education has been going on for a long time. It didn't start with COVID-19. So in 2019, online education was definitely growing in the US, according to Seaman et al. And Laterman. About 35% of US post-secondary students took at least one online course in 2018, and about 15% of students enrolled in all kinds of post-secondary programs were in fully online programs. Similarly, the global market for online education was growing. It was at 18.66 billion in 2019, and it was projected to reach 350 billion by 2025. However, these numbers make it seem like online education was more prevalent than even it actually was. In the US, for example, half of the online enrollments were at only 5 universities, and an additional 22% were at 47 other schools. And then worldwide, statistics aren't really available, but estimates are that maybe 1 to 3% of students at all levels of education, so K through 12 and post-secondary, were learning online before COVID-19. So definitely there was online education, but it wasn't everywhere. Then came spring 2020 with the COVID-19 pandemic. And as a response to the need to socially distance, a lot of schools at all levels changed their programs to online. Everyone figured out what Zoom was. We all turned our bedrooms into classrooms, and we tried to work with this new medium for delivering instruction. So that brings us to the purpose of this study. And in this study, I want to focus on the experience that faculty had in this emergency transition to a new way of delivering education. So the central focus is on the change, the implementation of online learning as faculty experienced it. However, it's really important to remember that this change happened in a particular context, the context of a crisis, a global pandemic. And it also was a change involving a particular content, which was online education. So while what I'm interested in is how the faculty experienced change, it's impossible to separate that from the context surrounding the change and from also what the change was, this implementation of this new innovation, online education. So basically, I want to look at faculty experience because it's the faculty who are really the front line in terms of the adoption of online education. Of course, student experience is very important, and that's a good thing for people to look at, and we can learn a lot from that. But student experience is very dependent on how faculty use this innovation, and how faculty use it is very dependent on their experience. So what I want to do is look at this in order to provide insight into how faculty experienced and coped with and responded to the change. And the hope is that then this will provide some guidelines or some ways to help cope with future crisis change and future change in education. So with all this in mind, my research question is, what was the role of faculty reflection in responding to the implementation of online education during the COVID-19 pandemic? And I want to provide a little bit of context about the location for this study. So the location where this study will be conducted is the branch campus of an American university, and this campus is located in Tokyo. And there are three reasons why this is an interesting place to study the implementation of online education and how faculty experienced it. So number one, it's interesting because online education was truly an innovation at this university. There was no online education in the undergraduate program before spring of 2020, when everything suddenly moved online. Secondly, I used the word suddenly, and the move online was super sudden for this university, and that's kind of the next thing that makes it interesting. The pandemic became an issue in Asia before it became an issue in the United States, and so by February, classes at this university were already moved online. Professors found out about the transition, and students as well, on a Friday afternoon, and by Monday morning, that all education was online. So the transition happened very rapidly, and before it happened in other parts of the world. So these faculty members were really pioneers in this innovation. And then the third reason why it's interesting is that the pandemic is still really going on in Tokyo. Vaccines are being distributed to some people, but it may well be the end of the year before the general population gets the vaccine. And so there is a very good chance that fall 2020 will be largely on, or fall 2021, sorry, will be largely online, as well as have previous semesters been. So I want to give you a little bit of information from my literature review in order to provide some background for the topic of this study. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about change, educational change, and adoption of innovation. So one important thing to keep in mind when you're studying change is that change, according to Van de Ven and Rogers, is a process. It's not an event. It's not a thing. It's a process that happens over time. And therefore, in studying change, you need to look at things over time, at how they're different in different points of time. And you really need to take into account the context, because it is a process where the context can be changing. Secondly, the idea of educational change. Fullen, in his 2016 book, The New Meaning of Educational Change, talks about the inevitability of educational change. Change in education is going to happen. At the same time, he mentions that educational change can be very disconcerting and painful for those involved in the change, and others echo this as well. Jacobs et al. Call change a risky strategy, even though it's something that happens and needs to happen. And that is why Fullen talks a lot about the phenomenology of change, by which he means the way that people who are in the change are actually experiencing it. And so that's what I want to study in this project. Finally, a couple of words about adoption of innovation from Rogers, 2003. And basically, adoption of innovation, or starting something new, a new idea, a new technology, is often a driver for change. Rogers talks about adoption of innovation as having two phases: the initiation phase, which includes agenda setting, figuring out what a problem is, and matching, figuring out a proposed solution. And then the following stages that have to do with actually getting the innovation going and solidified in an organization are called implementation. And so it's the implementation phases of change that I'm focusing on. Next, change in crisis. So as I've mentioned before, and as England says, the context is really important for understanding change. And the context of this change is the COVID-19 global pandemic. But COVID-19, as unique as we think it is not the first crisis to provoke educational change. World War II, for example, really got started the use of video in the classroom. Others have studied the effect of natural disasters on educational change, or of events like wars, or even things like snowstorms, power outages, and previous diseases like the H1N1 epidemic. So studying change in crisis is not necessarily a new thing, and we should expect that there will be more opportunities for education to change due to crisis in the future. And that's why it's important to look at how faculty coped with this change. In terms of online education, as I said, online education has been around long before COVID-19, and many people have studied many different aspects. Here, I just want to focus on a few aspects of online education that touch on faculty experience. So one would be Emelianova and Voronina in 2014 studied faculty adoption of online education and found that one thing that was a real driver of this was what they called an e-learning mindset, or what San Martin et al. Called a confidence in online education. And this is basically the idea that faculty believe that this is a tool that can work well for educating students. And that, of course, makes them more likely to try to use it in a more effective way. However, on the other hand, even though many faculty do believe this is a good tool, others have found that shifting to online education can really cause a lot of disequilibrium and concern among faculty as they wonder how this is going to affect their jobs and their futures and how it's going to affect students. This is because, or one reason why this might be, is because teaching online requires a complicated set of skills that are sometimes called TPAC, for technological, pedagogical, and content knowledge. So there's a lot of knowledge in different areas that faculty need to have in order to be able to teach well online. And this can often make faculty afraid that they won't be successful in this endeavor. And then just a bit about the role of reflection, as this is also important to the project. So reflection is thinking about what you're doing, and often, as Schoen says, this is caused by a surprise, what Brookfield calls a critical incident, something that's unplanned or unanticipated that makes a person kind of stop in their tracks and think about what they're doing and maybe change their ideas. And there's been a lot of studies of faculty using reflection as a way to cope with change, and even some studies done, Sheroff as an example, and Schopeisen and Kaltz in 2020. These studies are on how faculty used reflection as a way to cope with the transition to online learning. So faculty can use reflection as a way to cope with these changes and respond to them. And the theoretical framework for my project is a combination of the idea of reflection and then the stages of concern with adoption of innovations that was developed by Hall. And stages of concern basically addresses the different kinds of concern or worry or thoughts that people can have as they're adopting an innovation. And my thought is that any stage of these concerns might serve as a critical incident or a surprise for faculty members, causing them to think about their ideas about education, about curriculum, about pedagogy, and perhaps change some of their ideas. So then finally getting to my project, it's going to be a qualitative case study focusing on 4 professors at one American university in Tokyo. And I will be doing a variety of interviews with these professors. And the idea of focusing on these individual professors is that they have responded in different ways and thought in different ways about online education. And so by looking at how they have coped with it, how they've reflected on it, I think we can learn a lot about the process of change and a lot about online education as well. For this project, I will be doing data collection and analysis basically in 3 different ways that Stake identifies as the ways to do data collection and analysis in qualitative case studies. I'll be using documents, both online news reports and emails that build a context, a timeline for the study, an external timeline. Then I will be doing observations of the professors teaching their classes to understand more about their pedagogical techniques and how those might vary online or in person. But really the main source of information and data is going to be interviews. I am going to set up 5 interviews with each faculty member over the course of the fall 2021 semester, and each interview is going to focus on a different aspect of their experience of the transition to online education and how they used reflection to cope with this experience, and then what the results of that have been. And then I will be analyzing this data using a hybrid thematic analysis approach that is outlined by Faraday and Muir-Cochrane and Swain. And basically it's developing codes to divide the data into themes that relate to the theoretical framework of stages and concern and reflection, and relate to the research question about how faculty are using reflection to cope with the various concerns raised by the transition to online learning at this one university. And so that is basically my capstone project in a nutshell. And thank you very much for listening.